Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Amelia Hamilton, and I am the head of community here at NextGen Planners. And in today's show, I am joined by the brilliant Adam Prestwood from P1 Investment Management. Now, how are you, Adam?
Yes, all good. Thank you very much. How are you, Amelia?
Yeah, good. Thank you for asking. I just wanted to kick things off today then with, could you tell everybody what a day in the life of Adam looks like?
Yeah, sure. So as operations director of P1, that kind of spans a few different areas within P1 itself. So, well, I guess generally is the platform specifically. We've got platform and investment management. My role is specifically around the platform. And that would involve working closely with the platform team to make sure we're delivering a good service, obviously, to our advisors and end clients. And also working closely with the development team. That's, I guess, taking ideas and helping translate that into, I'm not going to profess to be a dev or a techie person, but trying to translate the best I can into what we're trying to achieve in conjunction with sort of what the development specification would be. So I would kind of straddle those two camps within P1 really on a day-to-day basis. Most of my background actually is in the advisory space. So I've been in the industry now for I think it's about 2006. Nearly all of that has been in the advisory space, and now working a lot more in the platform space. So I like to think that I'm familiar with numerous different platforms, and a lot of that then helps into as a user as well. Yeah. So that helps to feed in then to our platform product as we have it now, and how it will be moving forward.
What caused you to make that leap between working more in the advisory space and then a crossover to platforms?
I think it always intrigued me. I do have a foot in the advisory space still, slightly. So I'm kind of like straddling the roles, and it was just an area that actually I thought, well, there's a lot of platforms out there that they're not very efficient. They charge too much. And we thought we could do things better. So that's when we decided to launch the P1 platform within P1, mainly to, I guess, knock down those hurdles that I stated. And that, I don't think service levels are great. The straight-through processing side of things wasn't great. We're having to wait quite a long period of time to get stuff done. And the more we looked into it, the more we realized actually the tech stack for a lot of the companies, I think, was what was holding them back, and the legacy data issue. So actually, to us, it seemed like we could do some good things in that area, both for our clients at the time and also then an external IFAs and their clients.
For sure. So platforms in itself is quite a big topic. So I think the way I'd quite like to look at today's podcast is breaking it down into 3 sections. So if we first start looking at platforms from the advisor's point of view, then the client, and then into the longer term, so we can really get a sense, drill down into these areas. So first of all, looking at the advisor, what do you think frustrates advisors the most about the platforms they use?
Yeah, so I would say paper. A lot of them still have paper that's required to transact business. I think that also probably links into the speed at which you can transact business because of the paper sometimes, but sometimes not, which I'll come on to shortly. I think service levels, when you need a quick query answered and you have to wait, say, 5 working days for them to get back to you, we personally believe that shouldn't be the case in today's day and age. So I think those are probably the key ones. And just, I guess, to go into a little bit more detail around some of those. So paper is an interesting one. So it took a global pandemic for a lot of platforms to become so-called paperless. Now, we view paperless as not having any application forms. Whereas I think a lot of platforms now declare themselves paperless because they'll, for example, accept a signature scanned in via email, or they'll accept DocuSign, for example. For us, there's still applications that an advisor has to download, complete, get to the client, whether it's electronically or on email or via DocuSign or whatever it might be. So just because they're willing to, I guess, accept DocuSign or accept a scanned signature, it feels a little bit like that they're now able to claim themselves as paperless, whereas I personally would view paperless as, well, there's no application forms. You can key details online, hit a button, the client gets an email, they accept terms, and the account is open. So there doesn't need to be sort of this round robin of application forms, whether it's via email or paper copy. So I think paper has been a frustrating one to eradicate, and I think that does also link into then the speed of being able to transact. So just simple things like straight through processing. When you key something on, is it happening in real time, or is someone having to pick it up at the other end to get that action happen, whether it be, say, an ISA top up or a fund switch, whatever it might be. So I think knowing that something's happening instantly when you're doing it, I think would then remove, I guess, well, clearly it's a time saver for advisor and client, but you know it's happening at that point, rather than sort of waiting to hear confirmation back that it's been processed by someone. So I think there's numerous areas that that platforms I think they should be focusing on, but I think perhaps the tech stack might then hinder the ability for them to change that in the short term. I think every platform is capable of getting there. It's just the speed of which they're able to get there.
Absolutely. And so moving on, kind of touching on that idea of what frustrates advisors, looking at trying to make improvements in platforms, do you think advisors are the ideal interface for getting feedback on platform technology, given their relationship with clients and also their willingness to be honest without consequence?
Yeah, I think you'll certainly get the truth from advisors. I think the main part of that is because they're the ones that sat in front of the client 9 times out of 10. So they're the ones that are going to have to hear the grumbles and I guess face up to the client if something doesn't go as they planned. So I could see why they would have a heightened level of responsibility when wanting to make sure that, you know, when they've got some feedback, whether it's constructive or you know, something's gone wrong, they need to feed that back in. That they'll absolutely give you the truth on that. When it comes to, I think, I guess slightly wider feedback, I think that, you know, the support teams play a huge amount in that as well, because generally speaking in IFAs, it's the support team that end up doing the day-to-day. Obviously, there's various advisors that do bits and pieces themselves as well, but more often than not, we'll find there's a support team involved, and a lot of I think training should be steered towards the support team, because essentially they're the ones that will be using it on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of feedback can also come from the support team as well. So yes, I think advisors definitely are a great interface there. I think they'll give you the truth. The only slight caveat I'll place on that is that, you know, a lot of their focus will be on the end client and keeping them happy, whereas I think the day-to-day usage will generally come from the support team.
Absolutely. And if you think that advisors are quite well placed to evaluate kind of platform success, should we have a world where more platforms are advisor owned or advisor run?
Yeah, possibly. I think it's a lot of that's due to scale. It's really hard or almost impossible, I think, for a one-man band to be doing that. You'd certainly need a certain level of assets within your advisor firm to make it economical for you to embark on that. I think there's an element of taking control back from that, which I think is probably the biggest driver of some advisors becoming advisor as platform. So do I think there should be more? I think it depends on an advisor's reasons to do that. Yes, there could be commercial reasons, but I think the biggest drive is probably control and actually wanting to have the ability to react quicker than perhaps a third-party platform or provider could do so when servicing their clients. And also when they've got that control, assuming they've got the technical abilities in-house, they could then start streamlining certain situations around that control, things like onboarding and straight through processing into platform account creation, etc. So that becomes much easier when you're in control of the platform and the data and the user interface. Whereas I think to achieve that level of efficiency within individual IFA firms would be quite tricky on I guess an external platform, because that they've got a lot more stakeholders than just that IFA firm naturally. So yeah, I think we'll see more. I can't see it being the dominant driver personally.
Yeah. And so the final question I have from this kind of advisor side of the conversation is, do you think that platforms missed a trick early on by not seeing how seamlessly they could have integrated with other bits of advisors' technology?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I wouldn't say that they've missed a trick, because I think early on there wasn't the demand necessarily. There were people would view as a platform. It's relatively new, and people were using this platform as probably more than what a platform arguably should be doing. So to us, a platform, should be a simple user interface to trade securities and funds, etc. It doesn't need to be doing much more than that. So if the integrations were there from day one, I think you'll find that platforms probably wouldn't have as many bells and whistles as they do nowadays, because, for example, if all data was being pushed into a CRM that's not that platform of choice, and in a consistent manner, the advisor could then use that data in a consistent fashion across all of their clients, regardless of what platform they're sat on. But because those integrations weren't there in place, and the technology didn't really allow it as much in the early days, that there was a lot of closed data points really that were only basically of value to the individual platforms at the time. Now the world has moved into a much more integrated environment, and technology has clearly allowed that. So I don't think I'd go as far as to say they've missed a trick. Mm-hmm. It's more the expectation and the demand wasn't there then, where it is now. So we're moving into a place where with APIs nowadays, every data point should be accessible. So there's no reason why you can't be creating accounts from within your back office on a platform, just seamlessly pushing data through. So all of this is sort of becoming the expectation. Of course, we've had valuations and fees that have been pretty standard integrations to date. Whereas now we're in a situation where we could push the boundaries of that and do things like pulling documents back from the platform into the CRM, and then obviously displaying that back to the client via a portal, whatever it might be. We could go as far as account creation. So once you've done your onboarding piece and you've got all data in the CRM, you could then push that data into the platform. All of that is achievable now with open APIs, and that's almost certainly where the market is going, certainly in the short term. With advisors wanting and expecting the integration. So I think a lot of times the choice of a platform will actually determine what they're integrated with in terms of financial planning tools and different back office systems. Of course, with Consumer Duty on the horizon, we need to be slightly mindful of how an advisor's picking a platform to, I guess, suit their needs. It's not the client won't benefit from these integrations per se. A client will quite often want simple valuations and maybe a value over time when logging in. But I think the integration is more than just fees and valuations nowadays. I think we've gone beyond that. So yeah, I don't think we've missed a trick. I think there's just the landscape has shifted and demand is slightly different now.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great answer. And so moving from the advisor towards the client, you touched on the word onboarding in one of your previous answers, but I want to know, what does good onboarding look like to you?
Yes, so I would say, probably no surprise for me to say paperless again, based on what I was saying earlier. So I would say a paperless experience where I don't see any reason where an advisor couldn't there and then with a client create the account and get money on the platform. So there's at the moment, so the advice piece would look like delivering your advice via suitability report, whether in person or at distance. And then at that point, you're either in person and you're signing application forms, or you are having to circulate it via post. So good onboarding to me would look like, right, you've sent the suitability report ahead of time. You're sat down with your client, you've answered any questions they might have over it. And once they've an agreement to proceed, the advisor within 5 minutes could key their details onto the platform. that will trigger an email to the client. They could then accept terms and conditions there and then, and that's the platform live. So the client, the advisor, sorry, could then create the expectations for, say for example, it's £20,000 into an ISA. The client can make payment, and within seconds that's live on the platform and investing into the assets. So the advisor can do all that probably end to end within about maybe 10 minutes. Once you've got an engaged client with their email open, within 10 minutes, you could have that sorted. And the advisor is walking away from that meeting with assets on platform and they're already being invested as he's walking away. So, that's a far cry from having the application form signed, coming back into the office, getting the support team, perhaps, if they've got a support team, to post that off to the respective provider. And then someone, their end, a human, is having to pick that up, key whatever needs to be keyed and push certain things through to make sure the account's live and accept the money. So, I think the speed of which we want to transact is, the demand is changing massively. Paper doesn't need to be in circulation. Of course, there's always going to be a situation where clients aren't up to speed with emails, etc. Those clients have to be catered for. I would potentially argue a platform to the future, or I guess more forward thinking, they might not be the right clients on that particular platform, and as part of P1, that we're okay with that. So we're building something for the future. So a lot of what I've described is pretty much how we've tried to design what we do, and that's where our focus has been. In that, we didn't want paper. We wanted to speed a transaction, and that really is how I think a lot of platforms need to move towards. A lot of them are getting there, which is great. There's a lot of paperless straight-through processing things coming through now, but that's just part of the equation. So things like transfers, for example, that's part of the onboarding process. You're going to be transferring assets into the platform. There's no reason why that can't be paperless as well. So to me, good onboarding transfer-wise would look like key on provider, policy number, rough value, hit go. That will then just create the transfer to happen, and that's what we focused on. So again, in days gone by, even Origo, Origo's been fantastic for removing paper, but that is just cash transfer pensions. When we've got ISAs, GIAs, and actually pensions that want to go in specie, Origo can't be used for that. So a lot of platforms currently then need to operate paper in that environment, but we've tried to steer clear of that as well. So the onboarding piece for us is completely paperless, and obviously we're relying on the seeding scheme accepting it to be transacted paperless as well. But that's where the industry is moving towards.
Absolutely, and like you said, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but I think not getting sidetracked by that, if you're really wanting to make the process as efficient and user-friendly as possible, it's got to make sure that your efforts and your energy is focused in that area.
Yeah, so once you've presented your advice to the client, you want to transact that in the most efficient way possible. And if it then means that you pull out reams of paper for the client to be signing in 6 different locations, that doesn't feel very efficient to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've kind of established that platforms clearly have a lot of value. Do you think clients do actually value platforms themselves, and how common do you think it is that advisors would ever kind of show off to clients about how good their platforms are?
I don't think clients themselves will place too much value on the platform, as long as they're getting what they want from it. Yes, there's household names out that the client might recognise, but as long as a client has access potentially online to see live valuation feeds and perhaps value over time, maybe contribution history, relatively simple things like that, what fees are being taken from the plan. I can't see many other strong requirements from a client perspective of what they personally would need out of a platform. I think we're moving towards an interesting landscape now with Consumer Duty, where if I could just briefly compare that to protection planning. So an advisor doesn't have, or very, very rarely would have a selection of 2 or 3 life co providers that they would regularly go to go get life cover. They'd do their research, and whatever the cheapest is that meets the client's requirements, that's the option they'd go for. So it feels a little bit like Consumer Duty is almost bringing that concept a little bit into platforms. So why would the client need to pay £300-400 per year extra on one particular platform versus another, that's the point that needs to be justified. That's always had to be justified when it's in the protection world. If they're paying £25 per month versus £30 per month for a particular life insurance policy, that has to be justified. Whereas I think today the value concept of consumer duty is what's going to bring that at the forefront. So beyond clients needing to see valuations online, most of the other stuff is almost excuse me, it's an advisor requirement. So unless there's like particular wrappers that the client might want, or be able to hold a particular asset, something specific like that. If a particular platform can't do that, yes, they might go to then the next cheapest that meets the client's needs. So it's going to be an interesting space come consumer duty in that upon annual review, how would the client justify to the client the extra money they may or may not be paying on a particular platform? So I don't think advisors are sat there saying, look how great this platform is. They'll be explaining, what do you personally get from this platform? And as long as it meets their objectives, great. But I think consumer duty is going to be an interesting one that plays into that. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think for a moment an advisor is going to have a spread of platforms. That's definitely not the goal of consumer duty. There's client segmentation. That segment is great for that platform, and etc. So you're going to have clients with complex needs that might need, certain life elements to a particular platform, which is, providers like Transact are fantastic in that space with their bond products and their personal pension, etc. Most other platforms, they'll have, sort of what we refer to as a simple platform wrapper accounts, which, to be honest, will meet most of clients' needs. You open around tax wrappers, you invest in funds, and you maximize allowances and create income strategies where you need to. I think most platforms have migrated to that mean now. So it's those extra sort of bells and whistles that the odd client might need that then is justified for potentially the extra cost that client may end up incurring. Yeah.
And so following on from that, then, if we look at kind of, the best kind of platform, do you think the best kind of platform is just a quietly successful one?
Yes and no. I think if you're quietly successful, you not many people may not know about you. So I think by default you would have to be out there and shouting at how great you are, and obviously that depends on various different marketing strategies to do that. But if you're there's nothing wrong from in my view to just sort of be quietly behind the scenes, becoming in theory the top or the best value on various research tools, and advisors are using you, and obviously by word of mouth that will get around. I think the loudest ones aren't always the ones with the best tech or the lowest cost. So I think to say that the louder ones are the best ones would in my view definitely be incorrect. It's nice, I think, to be quietly successful, but equally you do need to sort of blow your own trumpet every now and then to say, look, this is great. You need to use this, and you need to get advisors to realise that. So it's difficult to be constantly quiet and to be successful, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that to be quietly successful.
Yeah, definitely. And so moving on across to perhaps what is the most interesting point in discussion about platforms at the moment is the long term. Where is it going? What's going to happen? Last question I kind of wanted to ask you is, in the future, do you think that there's a risk that all platforms might be owned by one or two larger companies?
I mean, possibly. I mean, consolidations will always happen. We're seeing that a lot now, and that can help with scale and margin. But equally, there'll always be new entrants. There'll always be entrants coming in, doing things slightly differently with tech or approaching something from a different angle. So, and also sometimes like the larger you are, although that can help, I guess, with margins, in order to provide better value to clients. Sometimes the larger you are, it can hinder innovation. It's harder to move the larger you are, and when you're when these consolidations happen, there's a lot of data that needs to be amalgamated, or they'll end up having to operate them as separately, which I don't expect for one moment. That's the goal of any consolidator. They would want everything consistent across everything they've consolidated. So there's a lot of challenges to moving that data around.
Yeah.
Yes, there's going to be consolidation. I don't think we'll end up just having one or two large companies because of the new entrance factor. That there's always new technology coming along, and the larger you are, the harder it will be to move on to that new technology. So I think the challenge where we are right now is to be able to consolidate into a technology stack that actually can remain flexible in order to then move with what the next requirement will be. I think the landscape is going to be very different in 10, 15 years time. So, and it's really hard to predict where that is. So to build something relatively rigid, there's some tech stacks out there that are relatively rigid right now, and they're finding it slightly harder to move with new technology integration, straight through processing and things like that. So yeah, the key, I think, for me would be to be able to consolidate something and keep flexibility. That will be the biggest challenge. That will, one, I think, protect yourself from the new entrants, but not to say that there won't be those new entrants. I think they'll always be there. There'll always be the next thing. So I think the biggest challenge for those potential consolidators would be to maintain service standards and the ability to then keep up with the new entrants who don't have legacy tech stacks, who don't have legacy data that they have to try and work with. They're a brand new technology with no legacy data at all. They can be far more nimble and operate things in a way that sometimes the larger tech stacks and the providers have huge amounts of data can't quite move as quick as those new entrants with no legacy data.
Absolutely. And that's what's exciting about it at the moment as well, is kind of looking at who the key players are in this landscape. In your mind, do you have an idea of who you think the platform leaders of the future are?
I think that's a really difficult one, because the leaders of platforms in the future will end up probably not known yet. I think they're obviously, there's numerous names that we could rattle off. Fantastic CEOs of platforms that are either no longer in the space anymore or still operating in the platform space. Those have done a fantastic job in taking sort of what the concept of a platform is to then where it become. So many advisors and clients have benefited from that concept. I think to go from where we are now to let's say 15 years time, it's going to be a crazy different world in 15 years time, in my view. So I think personally the platform leaders of the future aren't yet known right now, because I think there's going to be newer entrants coming in say in the next 5-10 years, who could well sort of take the lunch of a lot of existing platforms out there, because of the nimbleness that I touched on a minute ago. There's constantly more technology improving all the time. So it's going to be an interesting space, one that I think we'll have to keep a close eye on.
Absolutely. And we have to kind of mention AI. It's a huge topic at the moment that a lot of people are talking about. Do you see, in terms of platforms, do you see a future beyond advisors looking at platforms accounts on their desktop computers or iPads? Where do you think AI comes into that, if you think it does come into it at all?
Yeah, I think it would be naive to say that AI won't be coming into our space. We've got we personally are looking at AI and how we can then integrate and augment our offering via that. I think initially it will start with enhancing the chatbots that are already in existence out there. A lot of those chatbots have to be pre-programmed, so AI can kind of take that and I guess remove the need for pre-programming because of the the learning language model. So it's going to be in terms of how we access the data. I think that's going to be the biggest change for me. So the user interface as we see now, I'm not going to go make a prediction about where it's going to be, but I don't think we're going to be accessing platforms like we are, say, for example, with AI, if that's on your desktop, you could be searching, what's the ISA value of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and the AI will just tell you, because that AI will probably be hooked up to the various different providers you use and can pull that data back from you. That's I think where we can see this going in the short term. So there's certainly with the sort of introduction of voice controls and things like that, there's no reason why an advisor couldn't just ask their computer, what's the value of Mr. Smith's ISA. All of this is achievable with AI. So I think the biggest change is going to be, obviously the data isn't going to change much. The data is the data, but it's how we access that data and what we access that data from is going to be the biggest change with AI. And then I guess the knock-on effect to that, certainly from an advisor perspective, is then what do they do with that data? How can they use AI to then transport that into things like, I don't know, an advice piece or an annual review and stuff like that. So I think the biggest change from an advisor perspective is one, how they access the data, and then what they end up doing with it. So the data is the data. And the user interfaces that we all spend hours and hours and hours designing and working through from a product perspective might not be needed with AI in the future, because you can just ask the AI what a particular value is, or what pension contributions Mr. Smith has made in the last year. You can just ask it and it'll just tell you. So I think that will be the biggest change in terms of the way we interact with the data.
Yeah. Do you think you have any concerns about how AI would be integrated, or is there anything that worries you about that shift in that direction?
I don't think it would worry me just yet in this space. I think with just the concept generally with AI is obviously there's huge debates out there about how it's going to be controlled and the potential impact of that on all different industries. So I think how it ends up being controlled generally, I would hopefully like to think is then what rolls into the finance industry. As long as it's, for example, the AI, I'd like to think, I'm speculating here. I don't suspect for one moment it will have access to data it isn't allowed to have access to. A lot of that is behind, obviously, firewalls and passwords, etc. So if from our relatively simplistic industry, if you want a piece of data and you ask it, it should be able to retrieve that. I think that creating parameters around factual data isn't probably too difficult. It's going beyond. It's more sort of delivering information that's not static data is where I think the problems may arise. So using my example of asking what an ISA value is, or what contributions have been made, I'd like to think those are the relatively simple things that AI could get right. And then transpose those in a way that whatever the advisor would want to do with them, or platform users. I would think it's controlled in a manner on a wider scale before it needs to be controlled specifically for the finance industry.
Sure, definitely. And so then looking kind of 15, 20 plus years into the future, do you think we're still going to be talking about the future of platforms in 20 years? Where do you think this conversation will end up then?
Yeah, so I mean, the rate of tech change is just scary at the moment, isn't it? So with AI being sort of the next, I don't know, next internet, that type sort of big bang. So however, there'll always be a need to open tax wrappers, trade instruments, whatever the tax landscape looks like down the line, who knows? But there'll be products that cater for whatever tax landscape there is in place. So inevitably, I think we'll always be talking about the future of platforms, because the pace of change is scarily rapid at the moment. What we think is great now is going to be probably relatively old hat in 10 to 15 years time. So yeah, I think the future of platforms is one that and imagine end up going to a space where we can't even think of what it would be right now. Like, AI is a great example of that. Roll back 5 years, it would be inconceivable for sort of Joe Public to sort of think that AI could do what it's doing right now. Yeah, I think there'll always be a what's going to be happening in the future of platforms, but I think we're just going at this very steep curve now in terms of technology development, where it feels almost unpredictable in terms of what could be achieved in what would the future of platforms look like. I think roll back, say, 5-7 years, you could probably predict in a much easier fashion, I think, sort of what platform spaces will be looking like now in terms of, the integrations that have come through now. Those were largely on the cards, and just a constant improving of those integrations. I think with the introduction of AI, though, and how that is going to just transform the world generally, as well as in the financial industry, it's really hard to, I think, predict what 5 years is going to look like in platform space, let alone say 20.
Yeah, and as we've kind of talked about a lot now, the key thing about the technology around platforms is the speed of which it's kind of changing. Are there any tools or techniques or resources that you particularly lean on when trying to stay ahead of the curve, or making sure that you're on top of what's happening in that sphere?
It's having the right development team to know what's coming. We've got in-house development team that sort of has their finger on the pulse in the upcoming, so which is why we've kind of already started looking at the capabilities of AI. So obviously there's unknowns, isn't there? It's hard to know everything that's around the corner. So when we get to a point where we do know that, I think it might become relatively boring. The key thing, I think, is to have the right expertise, not just to be doing the now, but knowing what's coming and actually how we can get on the front foot to. First to market doesn't always sort of mean that the best. Sometimes second to market can sometimes be just as great because you've learned from that first to market. But just having your finger on the pulse of what other people are doing in the space, and how, for example, AI can be used. And what sort of the next tech beyond AI might be, to how that could be used in this space. That will be, I think, the game-changing aspect for individual platforms.
Absolutely. And so moving on to our final questions then that we like to ask everybody on the podcast, we always like to know from our guests about a book that has changed the way they think. Have you got a particular read that for our audience?
So I personally really like Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said. So it's basically comparing feedback loops in certain industries. It will essentially compare feedback loop in healthcare versus aviation. And actually, unfortunately, to use their examples, the healthcare industry is a situation where actually it's not always great to be owning up to mistakes. They don't look great on someone's record. Whereas in the aviation industry, there's a concept of actually almost rewarding sort of coming forward with something that's not gone right. And actually, as a result of that, things can change within, say, 24 hours in terms of new guidance to pilots, etc. It's a really interesting comparison between those two industries, and so it's sort of owning mistakes and having the feedback loop based on those mistakes. And actually, then it goes into things like marginal gains, where it looks at some of the elite teams in sports, a Sky cycling team, F1, etc. It kind of looks at how they're achieving efficiency via these small little marginal gains, that constant incremental improvements that are is where kind of the difference between, I guess, winning or losing in their respective sports. For me, when I read that, it was really good, because I was able to apply that quite neatly to our industry, and that's what's going wrong. Can we constantly have this feedback loop of then trying to improve that? And then kind of move forward again, feedback, improve, etc. So that was a great read for me, and it was nice because it was it was a good read that I was able to then apply to my kind of role, essentially. Was it someone in your world that had suggested it to you, or did you just kind of come across it? No, funny enough, it was my boss that suggested it. So yes. Definitely. Oh, it's nice because especially if you can share that understanding with your boss, to then be on the same page about how you're moving forward and how you're thinking about progress and making those marginal gains. That must be nice to be able to have the shared experience.
of understanding.
It instilled sort of my thought processes around actually we need to capture data in order to work through this. So working backwards from what didn't quite go right in order to improve it, you need to understand where in the process it needs to be improved. So we need the data to analyze that and find out how that can be improved. And then at the right point in the process to change something to mean that the correct outcomes happen down the line.
No, that sounds like a great read. I'm going to put that on my reading list. Maybe my summer reading list. I like that idea. Okay, so finally then, big question. What are you most excited to see in the financial planning profession over the next 10 years?
I guess it goes without saying that AI ChatGPT is going to be the biggest thing. You know, we've covered that numerous times on this already, so I won't sort of chat too much about that specifically. I think but that is probably the most exciting. I think for me also, it's I guess the knock-on effect of that and the technology generally in our space to see what that's going to do to our industry. You know, there's a lot of well-established platforms and successful platforms out there that perhaps aren't operating on a tech stack that's as modern as the new entrant. So it's going to be, I don't know if exciting is the right word for me. It's certainly interesting to see what's going to happen to those platforms. And I guess more importantly, more specifically, is what the price point is going to happen to those platforms. With consumer duty, obviously, it's challenging advisors to compare platform to platform on a value basis. And you know, if it's the advisor that's getting the value out of that particular platform rather than the client, that kind of needs to be internally challenged. But you know, within the advisory firm. So in terms of what the client gets out of that, there's an interesting concept that sort of that I've sort of slowly been sort of asking, I guess, advisors is that, you know, if they were to hypothetically have to pay the platform fee themselves, what platform would they then choose? So you've got certain platforms that you know, charge 25 basis points, 30 basis points to operate, you know, the wrappers and instruments, etc. You've got platforms that do 15 basis points. You know, so that difference in cost across the entire client bank could be hundreds of thousands of pounds. You know, would the advisor be willing to pay that themselves? You know, based on, you know, it's their choice to recommend to a client. I won't answer that question until it's on for advisor to answer. But that is, I think that's the challenge. I think in that where is this value assessment going to go, and how is that going to land with the existing platform providers who I guess don't have the margins to be able to reduce their platform fee as much as, say, the new entrants with newer tech. That margin needs to be maintained in order for them to operate. And if they were to come down to, you know, I guess what could be argued as the new, you know, standard of 15 basis points, are they able to operate with profit based on, you know, them needing, as it stands right now, needing admin team to process, you know, certain bits of business, whereas a lot of the new entrants now are straight through processing. You know, the advisor does what they need to do on screen, and that's it happening in real time. So then the support team can then focus on actually supporting advisors to make sure they know what they're doing and answering questions and troubleshooting here and there. You know, they're not. We personally don't need an admin team full of people who's processing application forms. So time can be better spent on servicing the advisors. So I think the value concept. I know this isn't necessarily going to be dragging out over 10-year time, but certainly in the very short term, in the immediate future, absolutely. So you know, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the well-established platforms who you know, need to operate close to 25, 30 basis points in order to sort of maintain profitability and actually, you know, be a viable business. That for me, it's yeah, I wouldn't say I'm excited to see that, because that would be very unfair for me to say that, but it's certainly going to be interesting how that landscape is going to be shifting over time.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really nice point to kind of end on looking at, is that in the sense of, you know, if you're talking to an advisor about perhaps how do you think their business might change, and you can kind of look on a longer time scale and be able to make those kind of predictions, where you're speaking at the moment, it's going, well, we actually really don't know. And the exciting thing is the immediate future. It's not, you know, 15, 20 years, as you mentioned, the problems that might come up or the way we're talking about it, we probably don't know yet. And the rate of change is such that the things that are the most pertinent questions are the things that are going to be making the most changes in the next few months, year. And that's what makes it exciting in that sense, doesn't it?
Definitely, yes. So yes, inside say 3 to 5 years, we'll end up having this great, sort of this environment where you've got AI really changing the industry, and you've also got a value assessment that is really going to put some of the well-established platforms under pressure. So I think those two things, just purely those two things alone, is going to mean an awful lot of movement in this industry, and I think it's worth advisors challenging their existing platforms on not just based on cost and value, but if they were to attempt to reduce costs to the level of perhaps what the new benchmark is, are they a viable business? That could be then a consideration for the advisor themselves. I'm not saying that they're not. I'm sure a lot of them are. But that will be a challenge for those well-established platforms to I think move towards what is potentially the new benchmark in platform pricing. The reason we started to be on platform is because we thought other platforms are too expensive. They were such a high proportionate cost to the client of the overall advice piece. So when you look at advice fees, you look at platform fees, fund fees themselves, and potentially DFM fees. To have the DFM fees, which quite often was disproportionate, and also the platform fees being disproportionate. We've moved into an era now where a lot of advice fees are maybe 0.75%, generally speaking. Some still operate at 0.5, some at 0.75. There's even quite a few at 1%. But when you've got, say, a platform fee that's at, say, 0.3%, that's quite a large proportion of the overall value chain when it's the advisor that's added the most value. So, of course, the advisor should be paid the largest share of the total cost to the client, and we felt that platforms were an unnecessary large proportion of that value chain, and consumer duty is here now, and we'll see what happens. In our view, advisors should get paid the majority of that value chain, because that's where the most value is added, from their advice. A platform is essentially just a bit of tech that enables the advice to happen and facilitates that investment. So it doesn't need to be a large portion of the value chain. So that's, I think 10 years time is going to be scary. AI will certainly impact that, but certainly in the short term, there's going to be interesting conversations in, say, the next 2 to 3 years where value sits and how that's interpreted.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point to end on. So thank you very much, Adam.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that was Adam Prestwood on the NextGen Planners podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can share it on all social media platforms, and you can listen to past and future episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on our website, which is nextgenplanners.co.uk. There you can find lots more information about our brilliant community. And finally, if you can leave us a review, it does really help to grow the podcast. Thank you very much for listening.